They laughed at Emily Carter moments before the Admiral hit the floor. The observation deck looked like the kind of room that wanted to be admired. Steel surfaces held a muted shine under clean white light. Monitors glowed in disciplined symmetry. Every tray, every sealed vial, every strip of gauze sat where Commander Blake Turner believed it should sit, down to the inch. He liked rooms that reflected him. Controlled, pressed flat, difficult to question. Emily Carter stood half a step behind a supply cart, one hand resting lightly on a sealed tray, already placed where people put things they do not want to think about. Turner had made that position clear before the Admiral ever arrived. Keep her off primary. Not privately. Not cruelly enough to be called cruel. Just loud enough for the room to hear, absorb, and obey. And the room did. Because rank has a way of disguising opinion as fact. Because a perfect record, a steady voice, and a pressed uniform are easier to trust than a nurse who speaks only when she must and notices details other people prefer not to revisit. Someone laughed when a junior technician redirected her to inventory. Emily did not react. She shifted a vial half an inch so its label lined up exactly with the edge of the tray. Adjusted the brightness on a side monitor by a single notch as she passed. Checked a seal that did not need checking. No wasted movement. No visible pride. No outward injury. At 0900 hours, Admiral Hayes entered the room. The deck tightened around him instantly. Shoes aligned with floor markings. Voices shortened into protocol. Hands stilled, then resumed only with purpose. Turner stepped forward before the Admiral had even reached the central station, already narrating readiness with the confidence of a man who had spent years learning how to sound indispensable in front of power. For the first minute, everything held. The displays moved in clean rhythm. The checklists matched the procedure. The room looked exactly the way Turner wanted it to look. Then one reading drifted. Subtle. The kind of shift most people miss because it does not announce itself like danger should. A number appeared where it did not belong. Then another lag opened behind it. Then a second metric compensated in the wrong direction. Admiral Hayes reached for the edge of the console and collapsed face first onto the steel floor. The sound came before the shouting. Then the room fractured. Alarms flared red across the monitors. A tray struck the deck somewhere behind Emily. Two technicians moved at once and nearly collided. A line of clipped protocol broke into overlapping commands. Turner dropped to one knee beside the Admiral and began issuing orders immediately. Fast, loud, certain, standard procedure, stabilize, reroute, push the system toward the failure it was most likely to be. His hands moved quickly, not precisely. That was the difference. Emily was still at the edge of the room, not frozen, not reluctant, just measuring. Her eyes moved once across the main display, then to the dosage line, then to the monitor path Turner was forcing into place. Her thumb pressed lightly against the tray's edge as if it anchored the calculation in her head. The protocol fit the shape of the emergency, not the emergency itself. She stepped forward. No one invited her. No one stopped her either. That's the wrong pathway. She said it quietly, not like a challenge, not like a plea, like a correction. For half a beat the room held. Turner turned his head. Then, without looking at her, he repeated the order in his own voice. Wrong pathway. Reroute now. The team obeyed him. Emily had expected that. She wasted no time being offended by it. She reached past one station, changed a dosage by a narrow margin, rerouted one monitor stream, reordered one sequence, and stepped back just enough to see the whole pattern again. No panic. No performance. No raised voice. The Admiral's vitals did not recover dramatically. That would have been easier for the room. Instead, the numbers began to settle the way truth settles. Slowly enough that only people paying attention could recognize what they were seeing. A pulse returned where none had been. Oxygen climbed by degrees. One screaming monitor cut out first. Then another found rhythm. For 3 long seconds, the room pretended it had all happened under control. Then the relief hit. Not gratitude. Not yet. Just the physical loosening that comes when catastrophe has passed close enough for everyone to feel its temperature. Turner stood before the Admiral was fully stabilized. That was his instinct. Not to step back into silence. To step back into authorship. He began reconstructing the sequence while it was still warm, framing the response in clean procedural language, placing himself exactly where authority likes to remember itself. At the center, decisive, competent, necessary. No one interrupted him. Most people do not challenge the first confident version of events. They accept it because confidence arrives before memory finishes forming. Emily did not look at Turner. She returned to the supply cart, checked the seal on a pack already intact, wiped a surface that did not need wiping, aligned the tray she had been using as if the room had not just tilted around her and then settled again. But behind the glass partition, the system kept running. Audio capture, input logs, time-stamped sequences. The room was choosing the story it preferred. The system was recording the story that had actually happened. Emily knew that. She did not look at the screens. She did not wait for the correction to come from anyone else. She moved the way she always moved, precise enough to leave no emotional residue behind. Across the deck, one junior technician glanced at a secondary display and frowned. He looked up at Turner, then back at the scrolling sequence. Something about the timing did not fit the story being spoken aloud. He said nothing, because saying something would require choosing between what he had seen and what he had been trained to believe. And most people in rooms like this choose belief first. Turner closed his account with a small nod, the kind that ends conversation before it can become inquiry, and redirected everyone toward recovery procedure. Clipboards appeared. Checklists resumed. Signatures reassembled order. Emily passed a calibration dial and corrected it by less than a degree. The kind of drift that would not show itself for another hour. The kind of error no one would have noticed until it became someone else's inconvenience. She logged the change with one line. Precise. Time-stamped. Unadorned. A quiet counterpoint to the spoken version of reality still forming in the room. Behind the glass, two administrative officers scrolled back through the synchronized capture system. Not because anyone had accused anyone. Not because the moment felt scandalous. Because routine has a way of uncovering what performance tries to smooth over. They replayed a 5-second segment. Then replayed it again. A voice entered before Turner's. A change came from a station his hands had never touched. Pattern appeared too clean to dismiss as coincidence. One officer leaned closer. Inside the room, Turner accepted brief acknowledgments with controlled humility, careful not to look as if he expected praise while allowing it to gather around him anyway. Emily closed the tray with a soft click. The sound nearly disappeared beneath the ambient hum of the equipment. The junior technician approached her halfway, hesitated, then kept walking. He carried his uncertainty with him like something breakable. On the main display, the stabilized readings held steady. The room looked normal again. Emily allowed herself one slow breath. Not relief, completion. Then she turned away before anyone could decide they had seen her. By late afternoon, the room looked exactly as it had that morning. That was the first sign it had changed. Normal had become a surface now. Something people stepped on carefully, not because they could name the difference, but because they could feel it underfoot. The first visible shift did not come through confrontation. Came through procedure. Commander Turner received the review notice on his tablet and read it once. Then again. His expression did not move much. Only a slight tightening at the corners of his mouth betrayed that the message had landed somewhere deeper than inconvenience. Scheduled review of operational logs. Inspection window. Standard language. Standard timing. Nothing dramatic. Nothing to resist. Nothing to control. For a moment he held the screen at a slight angle, as if perspective itself might make the content less precise. Across the room, Emily Carter was restocking a drawer. Gauze packs. Labels out. Edges aligned. Her movements had the same measured rhythm they always had. The kind of rhythm that does not invite interruption because it implies completion before anyone else has entered the frame. This time, the junior technician did not stop halfway. He came all the way to her station, uncertain but committed, holding a printed strip of timestamps like it might explain itself if he held it carefully enough. "I think the system captured something wrong," he said. He phrased it gently, not accusing the machine, not accusing Turner, leaving room for reality to soften itself. Emily glanced at the strip without taking it. Her eyes moved once across the sequence, then returned to the drawer. "The system does not guess." Her voice stayed even, not cold, not reassuring, precise. The technician swallowed and looked back down at the paper. The numbers no longer felt neutral. Behind the glass, the administrative officers had already escalated the review. Not urgently, not theatrically, just with the quiet inevitability of a process that has found a discrepancy it cannot responsibly ignore. They aligned the audio with the input record. Then again, a voice entered before the command later attributed elsewhere. A station registered a correction Turner had not initiated. Then another. Then another. One of the officers flagged the segment for inclusion without commentary. Commentary would only weaken what the sequence already proved. Turner continued moving through the room with controlled efficiency. He issued minor corrections, restored order where order had never fully left, answered questions in the same clean tone he always used. But now something in him drifted. A glance lingering a fraction too long on a monitor. A response arriving a fraction too late. Attention splitting between the visible room and the invisible record gathering beneath it. Not doubt in what he had done. Doubt in how what he had done would survive being remembered accurately. Emily closed the drawer and wiped her hands with a disposable cloth. Then she paused at a monitor that had not requested attention and adjusted a threshold so slightly it would matter only under stress. The kind of correction that prepares for a future moment instead of defending a past one. When she logged it, the entry looked exactly like every other entry she had ever made. Short, time-stamped, without decoration. Each line a quiet insistence that accuracy does not need a witness to remain true. The technician folded the printout once. Then again, as if reducing its size might reduce what it meant. On Turner's tablet, a second notification appeared. Confirmation of the review session time. Acknowledgement required. He tapped accept without hesitation. Refusal would have sounded like fear. Acceptance kept everything within the rules he still trusted. No one announced what was coming. No one needed to. The awareness spread the way pressure changes spread. Through small details first. Conversations ended a beat early. People glanced at the clock and immediately pretended they had not. Instructions landed into silence that lingered a little longer than usual. Emily did not look at the clock. As she passed the glass partition, she let her eyes rest briefly on the reflection instead of the people behind it. Not vanity, not detachment, just the recognition that whatever needed to be preserved had already been preserved, and whatever followed would not require her to say another word. The review began without confrontation. That made it heavier. Screens mirrored across a conference table. Audio, input logs, and timestamps arranged in strict sequence. No framing language. No preamble. Only order. Turner took his seat with the same composure he used on the floor. Shoulders squared. Hands controlled. Voice ready if needed. No one asked him to speak. That silence altered the balance more than accusation could have. One of the officers advanced the timeline not by minutes, but by seconds, isolating the exact point where direction changed. The clip played at normal speed. No edits. No emphasis. A quiet voice entered first. Emily's. Then Turner's voice followed half a beat later. Louder, cleaner, easier for authority to claim. No one reacted outwardly. They did not need to. Attention in the room narrowed around the detail like a lens closing. The second clip played. The same sequence repeated. The third removed coincidence entirely. Emily was not present at the table. She had not been excluded. She simply was not required. Her role was already documented in the most impartial language available. Sequence, timestamp, source. While the review continued, she remained in the supply area rotating inventory by week and month, checking expiration dates, touching details that do not alter under scrutiny. Inside the review room, the officers advanced to the stabilization segment. They did not explain what it meant. They let the pattern complete itself. That was enough. Turner leaned forward slightly. When he finally spoke, his tone remained steady. He acknowledged the sequence. He did not contest it. He could not. To contest it, he would have had to argue against the same system that had built his authority in the first place. The acknowledgement was not an apology, not an admission of motive, but it shifted the narrative from ownership to participation, from sole control to shared action. And in that shift, something essential moved away from him. Not taken, not stripped, simply no longer assumed. The decision that followed was procedural. Reporting structures would be reviewed. Responsibility lines clarified. Future operations would include direct attribution protocols. The language called it improvement. The effect was correction. When the meeting ended, chairs moved back almost in unison. Turner remained seated a fraction longer then. The others, looking at the blank screen where the timeline had been, as if measuring the distance between what he had believed happened and what had actually been recorded. In the supply room, Emily sealed a box and placed it on the shelf so it sat perfectly flush with the edge. Then she logged the inventory change. A message appeared on the internal system confirming that operational logs had been verified and archived. She read it once, closed the screen, not because it was unimportant, because it required nothing further from her. The change did not arrive as an announcement. It appeared in hesitation, in the way eyes shifted toward a second source before committing to a first instruction, in the way people paused before repeating something they would once have obeyed automatically, in the way the room, by the next morning, felt not slower but more attentive. Commander Turner entered at 0700 hours exactly as he always did. Uniform exact. Posture unchanged. Presence still disciplined enough to organize a room around itself. But the space no longer bent toward him immediately, not out of defiance, because alignment now required confirmation, and confirmation takes time. He issued a directive to recalibrate a monitoring sequence. It was clear, reasonable, technically correct. The team moved to execute it. Then one technician glanced at a secondary display first, verifying a parameter before proceeding. A delay of only seconds. On any other day, it would have disappeared. On this day, it registered as evolution. Emily Carter was already at her station reviewing overnight logs. Her finger traced a column of numbers without touching the glass. Her eyes moved at the pace of comprehension, not urgency. She noticed a minor inconsistency and corrected it without comment, logging the change in the same concise format she always used. Her presence was neither hidden nor asserted, simply consistent. The junior technician approached her again. This time he came without the folded printout, which meant he was no longer asking what had happened. He was asking how to see it before it happened again. "How do you tell the difference?" he asked quietly. "Between a pattern that fits and one that only looks like it does." Emily pointed to a threshold value on the display. "Watch what happens when the second reading shifts." That was all. No lecture. No performance of expertise. Just a fact left in the open for him to connect to the rest. He nodded. Not because he fully understood yet, because he trusted the direction. Across the room, Turner observed the exchange without interruption. His expression did not change. His attention did. For the first time, he adjusted one of his own instructions mid-sentence, refining it before it was executed. The correction was small enough that anyone inattentive would have missed it. But the room noticed, not because it humiliated him, because it aligned him. Later in the shift, a formal administrative update arrived outlining revised attribution protocols. Transparency, traceability, direct source acknowledgement. It came without meeting, without speech, without ceremonial explanation. Just a document. That was enough. Everyone read it differently. Some lingered on the language. Some pretended not to. Emily read it once and returned to work as if the document merely described something she had always understood. By midday, a minor fluctuation appeared during routine checks. Nothing critical. Nothing that wanted drama. Enough to matter. Turner looked at the display, then at the team. The old version of him would have filled the silence immediately. This time he asked one question. What do the numbers suggest? The room held still for a fraction of a second. Then the junior technician answered, referencing the same threshold Emily had pointed out earlier. Turner nodded and allowed the adjustment to proceed from that input. Emily did not step in. She watched the correction move through the system and only intervened once, to adjust a single value that clarified the relationship between two variables. One movement, one correction. Then she stepped back. The pattern resolved. The fluctuation became manageable instead of threatening. The team responded in sequence, each action reinforcing the last. No one person held the entire moment, and somehow that made the room stronger. Turner monitored the progression not as the sole source of direction, but as the one responsible for coherence. When the readings stabilized, he acknowledged the result with a brief nod. Not claiming it, recognizing it. That was the difference. Across the room, the administrative display updated in real time. Each input logged, each source identified. Transparency no longer a constraint but a framework. The junior technician glanced once at the display, then at Emily, not asking for approval, simply recognizing the consistency in how she moved through every problem. He returned to work with more confidence than he had borrowed the day before. By the end of the shift, the room felt steadier. Not because error had disappeared, because error no longer belonged to the first voice that named it. It belonged to the pattern, the verification, the correction. Turner had not been removed. That would have been too simple. He had been recalibrated, measured against something more exact than confidence. Emily finished her final entry and closed the log. The record did not need her standing beside it to remain true. The next shift began before sunrise. The facility still carried the muted quiet of overnight operations, but under that quiet was something more deliberate now. Not tension, not anticipation, something closer to alignment. At 0615 hours, a new case entered the system. Non-critical, irregular, the kind of case people ignore until it becomes inconvenient. The initial readings looked stable. That was the problem. Numbers inside acceptable range. Patterns that seemed correct at first glance. Edges that remained just outside what experience would call clean. Turner reviewed the intake and paused for a fraction longer than he once would have. Not because anything obvious was wrong. Because obvious had lost its monopoly on meaning. He stepped slightly aside. Not yielding position. Creating space. The team gathered around the station, each person reading the same data but now aware that interpretation mattered as much as observation. No one spoke first. Not from fear. Because first no longer meant final. Emily stood near the secondary console, hands resting lightly against the edge, her eyes moving through the readings not as separate numbers but as relationships. After several seconds, she adjusted one parameter. A tiny recalibration. The overall picture did not change. The picture became legible. The junior technician saw the pattern first after that shift and followed it with a second adjustment. Turner watched without interrupting, his attention no longer fixed on who acted, but on whether the actions converged toward accuracy. When he spoke, it was to confirm direction rather than dictate it. The correction moved cleanly through the system. Each source identified, each adjustment time-stamped, each decision preserved without distortion. Emily moved to a second station without being asked and caught a minor inconsistency that would have mattered later. She corrected it, logged it, and stepped away before anyone could turn the moment into theater. The case resolved gradually. No dramatic pivot. No applause. Just the steady alignment of numbers into something correct. Turner reviewed the final log and nodded once. Not to claim ownership. To acknowledge sequence. The briefing cycle after that was shorter than usual. Stripped down. Cleaner. Focused on thresholds, contingencies, and room for refinement. Emily stood along the sidewall, not taking notes, because she did not need them. Midway through the cycle, another sequence began to diverge from expected behavior. The junior technician spoke first this time, careful but steady. Turner asked for confirmation instead of overriding him. Emily stepped closer only long enough to adjust a single value that made the relationship between two variables unmistakable. The divergence resolved. The team followed the correction cleanly. The room did not pause to celebrate. That, more than anything, proved the new structure had taken hold. Later, the finalized report moved through official channels. Neutral language, routine format, unavoidable weight, timestamps paired with inputs, audio matched to action. The origin of every critical decision identified with a clarity that left no room for revision after the fact. Turner read the document in silence. When he reached the section attributing the pivotal correction from the Admiral's collapse to Emily Carter, he did not react outwardly. But something in his posture settled. Not defeat, not surrender. Simply the absence of any further attempt to shape what had already been fixed. The administrative note that followed outlined a realignment of responsibilities. Not framed as punishment, presented as accuracy. Across the room, the junior technician read the same lines and exhaled slowly, not in relief, but in confirmation that he had not imagined what he saw. Emily received the report at her station, opened it, read the sections relevant to her, closed it. Once was enough. Then she returned to routine verification, adjusted a minor parameter that would prevent drift later in the day, and logged the change with the same quiet precision she had given every entry before any of this began. Later, Admiral Hayes walked the floor again. He did not arrive like a man revisiting a scene. He arrived like a man measuring whether a system had learned from itself. Conversations continued. Work held its pace. He paused near the central station, looked at one display, then let his gaze travel across the room. Not searching for a hero, not searching for a culprit, observing flow. Where decisions began, how they were checked, how they were recorded. In that observation was a kind of approval too restrained to become praise. Turner stood nearby, attention on the same display. When their lines of sight met, the exchange was brief. A nod carrying understanding rather than instruction. Emily remained at her station, focused, unmoved by the possibility of being noticed. When she completed her final check, she removed her gloves, placed them neatly in the disposal bin, and cleaned the surface in front of her with the same measured motion she always used. No one called her name. No one needed to. The system had already done what voices had failed to do. By evening, nothing in the room announced that anything had ended. That was how you knew it had. The systems continued running. Displays updated in their steady intervals. Voices moved through clipped professional exchanges. But the structure held differently now. Turner still stood at the central station. Still disciplined. Still exact. Only the space around him no longer bent automatically to assertion. It responded. It verified. It aligned. The junior technician moved through a sequence without hesitation, cross-checking values before logging them. His confidence no longer came from proximity to rank, but from repeated alignment with outcomes that proved correct. Emily finished her final review of the shift by confirming absence rather than searching for error. The quiet state where everything remained within intended margins. Then she stepped into the corridor. The ambient noise softened behind her. Near the exit, a mounted screen displayed archive status. Verified. Secured. Indexed. She glanced at it once. Not to check for her name. Not to confirm her place in the story. Only to acknowledge that the truth no longer required her to defend it. Inside the operations floor, Turner adjusted a display by a narrow margin before the next cycle began. Observe. Verify. Align. The room moved with him now, not around him. Emily reached the door and paused for a second, her hand resting lightly against it. Outside, the air would not measure her, would not archive her, would not need proof from her. She exhaled once, quiet and steady, and stepped through without looking back. Because what mattered had already been recorded. And what comes after truth is not noise. It is pattern.